David Chen thought he was getting the job of a lifetime. 28, he was already known as one of the brightest minds in international relations. When the government offered him a position with the newly formed Intergalactic Diplomatic Corps, he jumped at the chance without thinking twice. After all, how many people get to say they work with aliens? The briefing seemed straightforward enough. Earth had made contact with the Zarathian Empire 3 years ago, and now they needed someone to help smooth out the details of a major trade agreement. The Zarathians had minerals that Earth desperately needed for their new space technology, and Earth had agricultural knowledge that could help feed the growing Zarathian population. It was supposed to be a win-win situation. David spent months preparing for the assignment, studied the Zarathian language until he could speak it fluently, learned about their culture and customs, and even practiced their traditional greeting ceremonies. His colleagues joked that he was more prepared than most ambassadors who had been doing this job for decades. He felt confident and ready for anything. The journey to Zarathia took 6 weeks on the fastest spaceship available. David used the time to review his notes and practice his presentations. He had dreams of making history, of being the person who helped bring 2 worlds together. The other passengers on the ship were mostly scientists and trade representatives, all excited about the possibilities this new relationship could bring. When they finally arrived at Zarathia, David was amazed by what he saw. The planet was beautiful in a way that took his breath away. The cities floated on clouds of shimmering energy, and the buildings seemed to grow from the ground like crystal. Trees, the Zarathians themselves were fascinating too. They looked somewhat human, but with skin that glowed softly and changed colors based on their emotions. Their technology was so advanced that it seemed like magic to David. The first few days went exactly as planned. David met with various government officials, toured the major cities, and began working on the preliminary trade agreements. Everyone was polite and professional, and he started to think this might be easier than he had expected. Were intelligent and seemed genuinely interested in building a good relationship with Earth. Then everything changed during what was supposed to be a routine meeting with the Imperial Council. David walked into the Grand Chamber expecting to discuss shipping routes and trade quotas. Instead, he found himself facing the Emperor himself, surrounded by dozens of high-ranking officials, all wearing formal ceremonial robes. The Emperor stood up and began speaking in a voice that echoed throughout the chamber. At first, David thought it was just another formal welcome speech. But as the translation device in his ear began working, he realized the Emperor was talking about marriage contracts and political alliances. David felt his stomach drop as he began to understand what was happening. The Emperor explained that his youngest daughter, Princess Zaraketh, had reached the age where she must marry according to Zarathian law. However, she had refused every suitable partner from their own world. The situation had become a political crisis because the other noble families were starting to question the Emperor's authority. They needed a solution that would satisfy the traditional laws, while also showing that the royal family was open to new ideas. David tried to interrupt to explain that there must be some misunderstanding, but the Emperor continued speaking. He said that David's arrival was clearly a sign from the cosmic forces that guide their world. It's a marriage between his daughter and the Earth diplomat would show that the royal family was leading the way into a new era of interplanetary cooperation. The room fell silent as the Emperor finished speaking. David felt like he was in a nightmare. He'd come to Zarathia to negotiate trade agreements, not to become part of some political marriage scheme. He looked around the room at all the faces, staring at him expectantly, and he realized that saying no might not be an option. David tried to explain that Earth didn't practice arranged marriages, that he had no authority to make such decisions, and that surely there must be some other way to solve their political problems. But the Emperor's advisors were ready with answers to every objection. They showed him ancient laws and treaties that seemed to support their position. They explained that refusing would be seen as an insult to the entire Zarathian people, and could destroy any chance of the trade agreement that Earth needed so desperately. The worst part was the call he had to make to his superiors back on Earth. David expected them to support him, to find a way to get him out of this impossible situation. Instead, they told him that the trade agreement was too important to risk. The minerals they needed from Zarathia were essential for Earth's defense systems and space exploration programs. He couldn't afford to lose this opportunity over personal concerns. David felt completely trapped. He was thousands of light years from home, surrounded by people who seemed determined to make him marry someone he had never even met. The weight of responsibility pressed down on him like a physical force. If he refused, he might be responsible for destroying Earth's relationship with their first alien allies. If he agreed, he would be giving up control of his own life in ways he had never imagined. The Emperor gave him 1 month to prepare for the ceremony. During that time, David would live in the palace and learn about Zarethian marriage customs. He would also have limited opportunities to meet his future bride. Always under the watchful eyes of palace guards and advisors, the Emperor assured him that this was more freedom than most Zarethian marriages allowed, as if that was supposed to make David feel better about the situation. As David was escorted to his rooms in the palace, he caught his first glimpse of Princess Zarekith. She was standing on a balcony overlooking the gardens, her skin glowing with patterns of deep blue and silver. Even from a distance, he could see that she was beautiful in the ethereal way that all Zarethians seemed to be. But there was something in her posture, something in the way she held herself, that told him she was just as unhappy about this arrangement as he was. That night, David lay in his incredibly comfortable but unfamiliar bed, staring up at the ceiling that showed a real-time view of the stars above the palace. He thought about his life back on Earth, about the career he was building, and the future he had planned. None of it had included marrying an alien princess on a distant world. He wondered if he would ever see Earth again, or if this palace would become his permanent home. The next morning began a routine that would continue for the next month. David had lessons in Zarethian etiquette, learned about the marriage ceremony traditions, and attended formal dinners where he was introduced to various members of the royal court. Everyone was polite, but he could feel their curiosity and judgment. He was the outsider, the strange human who was somehow worthy of marrying their princess. Through it all, David kept thinking about Princess Zarekith. He saw her occasionally, in the palace corridors or gardens, always at a distance, always surrounded by her own attendants. She never looked at him directly, but he had the feeling that she was studying him just as carefully as he was trying to understand her situation. Both of them were trapped in this political game, but neither of them had any real power to change the rules. As the days passed, David began to realize that his life as he knew it was over. Whether he liked it or not, he was going to become part of the Zarethian royal family. The question was whether he could find a way to make the best of an impossible situation, or whether he would spend the rest of his life regretting the day he ever applied for that job with the Intergalactic Diplomatic Corps. 3 weeks had passed since David learned about his forced marriage arrangement, and he still hadn't spoken a single word to Princess Zarekith. The palace rules were strict about unmarried couples meeting alone, but David was getting tired of catching glimpses of her from across crowded rooms. He decided to take matters into his own hands. Early one morning, David slipped away from his guards during their shift change. He had been studying their routines for days, waiting for the perfect moment. The palace gardens were usually empty at sunrise, and he hoped to find some peace there. Instead, he found her. Princess Zarekith was sitting by a fountain in the center of the garden, her skin glowing with soft morning light. She was reading something on a device that looked like a crystal tablet, completely absorbed in whatever was displayed on its surface. David hesitated for a moment, then decided this might be his only chance for a real conversation. He approached carefully, trying not to startle her, but as soon as his foot touched the gravel path, she looked up sharply. Her skin immediately shifted from the gentle blue-green of concentration to a deep, angry red. David had learned enough about Zarethian culture to know that this was not a good sign. "So you're the human who thinks he can just waltz into my life and take control of it," she said, her voice carrying a musical quality that all Zarethians possessed, but with an edge that made David step back. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to disturb you," David began, but she cut him off with a wave of her hand. "Disturb me? You've done more than disturb me. You've ruined everything I've worked for my entire life. Do you have any idea what you've done by agreeing to this ridiculous arrangement?" David felt his own anger rising. "I didn't agree to anything. I was told I had no choice, just like you apparently don't have a choice either." Princess Zarekith stood up abruptly, her height nearly matching David's. Don't you dare compare our situations. You're getting something out of this deal. Power, status, access to our technology. I'm getting nothing except a prison sentence. A prison sentence? Is that what you think marriage to me would be? David shot back. I'm not exactly thrilled about this either, princess. I had a life before I came here, plans that didn't include becoming part of your family's political games. Their argument was getting louder. David could see the princess's skin patterns shifting rapidly between red and deep purple. He had learned that purple meant she was really upset, not just angry, before either of them could say anything. Else, they heard the sound of running footsteps. Princess Zaraketh. A palace guard rounded the corner, followed by 2 more guards and David's personal attendant. The look of panic on their faces would have been funny under different circumstances. Your Highness, you cannot be here alone with the Earth diplomat, the head guard said, clearly struggling to be respectful while also being firm. The Emperor has strict rules about such meetings. David expected the princess to be embarrassed about being caught, but instead she looked even more furious. Oh, now I can't even sit in my own garden without being watched like a criminal. The guards exchanged nervous glances. Being responsible for the princess's safety was clearly a challenging job, even under normal circumstances. Having her angry at the system they represented made it even worse. As punishment for their unsupervised meeting, the Emperor decided that David and Princess Zaraketh would be required to spend 2 hours every day in the palace library, learning about each other's cultures under the watchful eye of the royal tutor. The Emperor called it matrimonial preparation. But both David and the princess knew it was really just another form of control. The first few library sessions were painfully awkward. They sat at opposite ends of a long table, surrounded by books and educational materials about Earth and Zarathian customs. The royal tutor, an elderly Zarethian named Master Colvin, tried his best to facilitate conversations between them. But both David and the princess seemed determined to be as uncooperative as possible. Perhaps the princess would like to explain the significance of the crystal ceremonies to our Earth guests, Master Colvin suggested during their 3rd session. I'm sure the Earth diplomat can read about it himself, Princess Zaraketh replied, without looking up from her own book. He seems to think he's quite intelligent. David was getting tired of her attitude. I'd love to learn about your ceremonies. It's fascinating how different cultures approach spiritual practices. The princess finally looked at him, her skin showing the faint yellow patterns that indicated surprise. You actually want to know about our customs? Not. Just memorize them for the wedding ceremony? Of course I do. I'm a diplomat, remember? Understanding other cultures is literally my job. For the first time since he'd met her, Princess Zaraketh seemed to really look at him. Her skin patterns shifted to a softer green, which David had. Learned meant she was thinking carefully about something. Most people find our ceremonies boring, she said cautiously. They're very scientific, based on energy manipulation and crystal resonance. That sounds incredible, David said, and he meant it. I've been wondering how your technology works. Everything here seems so advanced compared to what we have on Earth. The princess leaned forward slightly, her interest clearly growing. You've noticed the energy patterns in our buildings? Most visitors don't even realize they're there. It's hard to miss when you know what to look for, David replied. I studied engineering before I got into diplomacy. The way your city structures seem to generate their own power is amazing. Master Colvin looked pleased as he watched the ice between them begin to thaw. Over the next few sessions, their conversations became more natural. David learned that Princess Zaraketh wasn't just interested in their ceremonies and technology. She was actually one of the leading experts on it. She had spent years studying energy conversion systems and had even developed some improvements to their existing technology. The problem was that her contributions were largely ignored by the Royal Council because she was female, and worse, because she was the youngest child. In Zarethian society, the youngest was expected to be quiet, obedient, and focused on eventually getting married and producing children. Her intelligence and scientific interests were seen as problems to be solved rather than gifts to be celebrated. That's why they're so eager to marry me off, she explained one day as they walked through the library stacks. If I'm busy being a wife, I won't have time to embarrass them with my inappropriate interests. David felt a surge of anger on her behalf. That's terrible. Your ideas could probably benefit your entire planet. You really think so? Princess Zaraketh asked, her skin glowing with the soft pink that indicated hope. I know so. Some of the concepts you've described are decades ahead of anything we have on Earth. You're brilliant. Anyone who can't see that is an idiot. The princess stopped walking and stared at him. No one has ever said that to me before. Then, you've been talking to the wrong people, David said simply. Their relationship began to change after that conversation. Instead of seeing each other as opponents in an unwanted situation, they started to become allies. They were both trapped by circumstances beyond their control, but they were also both intelligent people who could appreciate each other's minds. David found himself looking forward to their library sessions. Princess Zaraketh was not only brilliant, but also funny in a dry, sarcastic way that reminded him of his favorite professors back on Earth. She had a way of making observations about palace life that made him laugh despite their serious situation. Princess Zaraketh, for her part, seemed to enjoy having someone who actually listened to her ideas without dismissing them. She started bringing her research notes to their sessions and explaining her theories about energy manipulation. David couldn't understand all the technical details, but he could see how passionate she was about her work. The turning point came. During their 4th week of library sessions, they were discussing the differences between Earth and Zarethian government systems when Princess Zarethian made a comment about how the Royal Council's decision-making process could be improved with better data analysis. You should present that idea to them, David suggested. Princess Zaraketh laughed bitterly. They don't want to hear ideas from me. Trust me, I've tried. What if we presented it together? I'm supposed to be learning about your systems anyway. I could ask questions that would let you explain your ideas. The princess looked at him with something like wonder. You would do that? Help me get my ideas heard? Of course, they're good ideas. Your people deserve to benefit from them. Next day, they put their plan into action during a formal dinner with several council members. David asked carefully planned questions about Zarethian governance, and Princess Zaraketh provided detailed, thoughtful answers that showcased her intelligence and knowledge. At first, the council members seemed surprised to hear the princess speaking so knowledgeably about political matters, but as the conversation continued, David could see that they were beginning to take her seriously. Her ideas were too good to ignore, even if they were coming from someone they had previously dismissed. 2 weeks before the wedding, David was spending his nights in the palace library, desperately searching for any loophole that might free them from this arranged marriage. The wedding preparations were in full swing throughout the palace, with servants rushing around, organizing flowers, decorations, and feast preparations. Everyone seemed excited except the bride and groom themselves.
Ow.
David had become something of a detective studying ancient Zarethian legal texts and marriage laws. His diplomatic training had taught him to read between the lines of official documents, and he was convinced there had to be some way out of their situation. The Zarethians were logical people who valued tradition, but surely they wouldn't force a marriage that made both parties miserable. Princess Zaraketh often joined him during these late-night research sessions. She had access to older texts that weren't available to outsiders, and her knowledge of ancient Zarethian language was much better than David's. They had become a good team, working together to understand the complex legal system that governed their lives. Look at this, Princess Zaraketh said one evening, pointing to a passage in a particularly old book. This law says that royal marriages can be cancelled if one of the parties is found to be divinely chosen for a higher purpose. David leaned closer to read the text. What does that mean exactly? Divinely chosen for what? I'm not sure, she admitted. The language is very old, and some of these concepts don't translate well into modern terms, but it seems to suggest that certain people are meant for special roles that require them to remain unmarried. David felt a spark of hope. Like what kinds of roles? Princess Zaraketh was quiet for a moment, her skin pattern shifting to the deep blue that meant she was thinking hard. Well, there are the Crystal Keepers, but that position hasn't been filled in over 300 years. And the High Priestess of the Energy Chambers, but that's just a legend now. Tell me about the High Priestess, David said, settling back in his chair. What made it legendary? The princess's eyes lit up as she began to explain. According to the old stories, the High Priestess was responsible for maintaining the balance of energy that keeps our planet stable. She could communicate directly with the crystal chambers and control the flow of power throughout our cities. The position required someone with very specific abilities, someone who could handle massive amounts of energy without being destroyed by it. And this person had to remain unmarried. Yes, because the energy work required complete dedication. The High Priestess couldn't have any divided loyalties or distractions. She had to be purely focused on serving the planet and its people. David felt his excitement growing. How did they choose who would become High Priestess? That's the interesting part, Princess Zaraketh said, pulling out another ancient text. They didn't choose. The person was born with special markers. That showed they were meant for the role. Genetic markers that appeared only once every 1,000 years or so. What kind of markers? Princess Zaraketh hesitated. Well, according to these texts, the chosen one would have unusual energy patterns in their blood, enhanced ability to communicate with crystal technology, and... She paused, her skin flushing to a pale yellow. And what? And the ability to make their skin glow brighter than normal Zarethians, especially when they're emotional or concentrating hard. David stared at her. Princess, your skin does glow brighter than anyone else's I've met. I noticed it the first time I saw you. That's just because I'm young, she said quickly. Young Zarethians often have brighter skin patterns. Tear. Not the youngest person in the palace, David pointed out. I've met other young Zarethians, and none of them glow like you do. Princess Zaraketh was quiet for a long moment. David could see her mind working, processing this information. Even if that were true, she said finally, how would we prove it? These are just old stories. The technology to test for these genetic markers probably doesn't exist anymore. Actually, David said slowly, I think it might. Remember when I first arrived and they did all those medical tests on me? They said it was to make sure I was healthy enough to live on Zerethia, but they used some pretty advanced genetic analysis equipment. The next morning, David approached the palace. Medical staff with a carefully prepared request, he explained that he wanted to understand more about Zerethian genetics for his diplomatic reports back to Earth. He was particularly interested in the genetic traits that made some Zerethians more sensitive to energy manipulation than others. The medical staff was happy to help. They were proud of their advanced genetic analysis technology and eager to show it off to the Earth's diplomat. Within a few hours, they had prepared a comprehensive analysis of Princess Zaraketh's genetic profile. When David saw the results, his hands started shaking. The genetic markers were all there, exactly as described in the ancient texts. Princess Zaraketh wasn't just unusually bright or talented, she was literally 1 in a million, carrying genetic traits that hadn't appeared in over 1,000 years. He found Princess Zaraketh in the garden where they had first met, sitting by the same fountain. She looked up as he approached, and he could see the question in her eyes. The tests came back, he said quietly, sitting down beside her, and David handed her the genetic analysis report. You're not just a princess, Zaraketh. You're the chosen High Priestess. The markers are all there, every single one mentioned in the ancient texts. Princess Zaraketh stared at the report for a long time, her skin patterns shifting through colors David had never seen before. When she finally looked up, her eyes were filled with tears. This explains so much, she whispered. I always felt different, like I didn't belong in the normal royal life. My connection to the crystal chambers, I thought I was just imagining. You can actually communicate with the crystal chambers? David asked in amazement. I've been able to sense them since I was a child. Sometimes I can even influence their energy output, but I never told anyone because I thought they'd think I was crazy. David felt like pieces of a puzzle were falling into place. That's why you're so good at energy manipulation technology. It's not just intelligence, you have a natural connection to it. Princess Zaraketh stood up and walked to the fountain, placing her hands on the crystal formations that decorated its edges. As David watched, the crystals began to glow brighter, responding to her touch. I can feel the energy flowing through the entire palace, she said in wonder. I can sense every power source, every energy converter. It's like ... like I'm connected to the whole planet. This is incredible, David said. You're not just royal. By birth, you're meant to be a leader in a completely different way. But then reality set in. Wait, Princess Zaraketh said, her excitement fading. If this is true, why didn't anyone know about it?
Oh, why are they still pushing this marriage?
David's expression grew serious. That's what I'm afraid of. I think some people do know, or at least suspect. And they don't want you to claim your rightful position. Who would want to prevent me from becoming High Priestess? Anyone who benefits from the current power structure, David said. Think about it. If you became High Priestess, you'd have authority over the planet's energy systems. That's real power, not just ceremonial royal duties. Princess Zaraketh sank back down onto the fountain's edge. Minister Vexroth, she said quietly. He's been pushing for this marriage more than anyone else. He kept telling my father that. It was essential for political stability. He's your father's closest advisor, right? He'd have access to genetic records, historical documents, everything. David, if you're right, this means the marriage isn't just about politics. It's about preventing me from discovering who I really am and what I'm meant to do. David nodded. Grimly, and if we're going to stop this, we need to be very careful. Minister Vexroth has a lot of power, and he's not going to give up easily. Princess Zaraketh looked at the genetic analysis report again, then at David. Are you ready to fight for this? If we move forward, we'll be going against some of the most powerful people in the Empire. Are you kidding? David said with a smile. I came here to build bridges between worlds. Helping you claim your true destiny sounds like the most important bridge building I could possibly do. As they sat by the fountain, planning their next moves, both David and Princess Zaraketh realized that their relationship had changed forever.
Oh.
They were no longer just two people trapped in an unwanted marriage. They were partners in something much bigger, a mission to uncover the truth and fight for Princess Zaraketh's right to fulfill her true purpose. The wedding was still 2 weeks away, but David had a feeling that by the time those 2 weeks were over, everything would be different. The question was whether they could expose the conspiracy before it was too late, or whether Minister Vexroth would find a way to stop them first. That night, as David lay in his palace room looking up at the stars, he thought about how much his life had changed. He had come to Zarithia as a diplomat, but now he was something much more important. He was the person who had helped Princess Zaraketh discover her true identity, and that discovery was going to change both of their lives, forever. With only 10 days left until the wedding, David and Princess Zaraketh knew they had to act fast. They had proof of her true identity, but they needed evidence of Minister Vexroth's conspiracy. The problem was that gathering such evidence would put them both in serious danger. David suggested they start by investigating the minister's official duties and responsibilities. As the Emperor's chief advisor, Vexroth had access to almost every government document and decision. If he was hiding something, there would be traces of it in his work. Princess Zaraketh knew the palace better than anyone, including the locations of several hidden passages that the royal children had used for centuries to move around unseen. She could access areas that would be impossible for David to reach without raising suspicion. Their first breakthrough came when Princess Zaraketh discovered financial records hidden in Vexroth's private office. The documents showed that large amounts of money meant for planetary defense systems had been redirected to personal accounts. The minister had been stealing from the government for years, using his position to make himself wealthy while leaving Zarithia vulnerable to potential attacks. This is huge, David said as they studied the documents in their secret meeting place, deep in the palace library. If this information got out, it would destroy his career and probably land him in prison. But it doesn't explain why he's so determined to stop me from becoming High Priestess, Princess Zaraketh pointed out. There has to be more to it. She was right. Over the next few days, they discovered that Vexroth's crimes went far beyond simple theft. He had been systematically weakening Zarithia's energy infrastructure, making the planet more dependent on outdated technology that he could control. A true High Priestess would be able to detect and fix these problems immediately, which would expose his sabotage. Even worse, they found records showing that other potential High Priestesses had been born over the centuries, but had mysteriously disappeared, or died young. The genetic markers that made someone eligible for the position were incredibly rare, but they weren't unique to Princess Zaraketh. The problem was that no one with those markers had survived long enough to claim their rightful role. He's been doing this for decades, Princess Zaraketh realized, her skin glowing with the deep red of anger. Every time someone was born who could challenge his power, he found a way to eliminate them. And now he's trying to eliminate you too, David said grimly. Not by killing you, but by trapping you in a marriage that would make it impossible for you to fulfill your true purpose. The more they learned about Vexaroth's schemes, the more dangerous their situation became. The minister had spies throughout the palace, and David and Princess Zaraketh had to be extremely careful about their meetings. They developed a system of coded messages and used the ancient passages to avoid being seen together. During this time, something unexpected happened as they worked together to uncover the truth. David and Princess Zaraketh found themselves growing closer in ways they hadn't anticipated. Their partnership had begun as a necessity, but it was becoming something much deeper. David found himself admiring not just Princess Zaraketh's intelligence, but her courage and determination. She was risking everything to fight for what was right, even though she could have chosen to simply accept her fate and live a comfortable life as a royal wife. Her passion for justice and her willingness to sacrifice her own safety for the good of her people made him see her in a completely new light. Princess Zaraketh, meanwhile, was discovering that David wasn't just helping her out of diplomatic duty. He genuinely cared about her as a person and believed in her potential. No one had ever supported her dreams the way he did, and she began to realize that her feelings for him were becoming much more than gratitude or friendship. One evening, as they worked late in the hidden library chamber, Princess Zaraketh looked up from the documents they were studying and found David watching her with an expression she had never seen before. "What is it?" she asked softly. "I was just thinking," David said quietly, "about how different everything could have been if we had met under normal circumstances." Princess Zaraketh felt her skin flush with the soft pink that indicated deep emotion. "Do you think we would have found each other anyway, even without all this political drama?" "I'd like to believe we would have," David replied. "You're an incredible person, Zaraketh. Anyone would be lucky to know you." The moment was interrupted by the sound of footsteps in the corridor outside their hiding place. They quickly gathered their documents and extinguished the lights, waiting in silence until the danger passed. But something had changed between them in that quiet moment, and they both knew it. Their investigation hit a major breakthrough when they discovered that Minister Vexaroth was planning to do more than just prevent Princess Zaraketh from becoming High Priestess. He was planning to destroy the crystal chambers themselves, claiming they were becoming unstable and posed a threat to the planet's safety. With the chambers gone, no future High Priestess would ever be able to claim her power. "This is it," David said as they read through Vexaroth's secret communications. "This is what we need to stop him. He's not just stealing money or preventing you from taking your rightful position. He's planning to destroy the very foundation of Zarathian civilization." Princess Zaraketh's skin was glowing brighter than David had ever seen it, responding to her intense emotions. "The crystal chambers have protected our planet for thousands of years. Without them, our cities would lose power, our technology would fail, and millions of people would suffer. We have to expose this plan," David said. "But we need to be smart about it. If we just walk into the throne room and start making accusations, Vexaroth will deny everything and probably have us arrested for treason." They spent the next 2 days planning their approach. David would use his diplomatic connections to request a formal hearing before the Planetary Council, claiming he had discovered information vital to Zarathia's security. Meanwhile, Princess Zaraketh would prepare for the trial of illumination, the ancient ceremony that would prove her worthiness. To become High Priestess, the trial of illumination was dangerous. It required the candidate to connect directly with the crystal chambers and channel their energy through her body. If she truly carried the genetic markers of a High Priestess, she would be able to handle the massive power flow and emerge transformed. If she didn't, the energy would destroy her. "Are you sure about this?" David asked as they reviewed the trial requirements. There's no going back once you start the process. Princess Zaraketh nodded firmly. I've felt the connection to the chambers my whole life. I know I can do this. The question is whether we can expose Vexroth's conspiracy before he finds a way to stop me. The night before their planned confrontation, David and Princess Zaraketh met one final time in their secret chamber. Tomorrow would change everything, one way or another. Whatever happens, David said, taking her hands in his, I want you to know that meeting you has been the most important thing that's ever happened to me. Not just because of the political situation, but because of who you are. Princess Zaraketh's skin glowed with the warm gold that indicated deep love and contentment. I feel the same way. Even if we hadn't been forced into this situation, I think I would have fallen in love with you anyway. They held each other in the quiet darkness, knowing that tomorrow would test everything they had worked for. The wedding was still 3 days away, but David had a feeling that by the time those 3 days were over, either they would have won their freedom and exposed the conspiracy, or they would have lost everything. As they prepared to leave their hiding place, Princess Zaraketh turned to David one last time. Promise me something, she said. If the trial of illumination goes wrong, if something happens to me, promise you'll still find a way to stop Vexroth. The people of Zirathia deserve to know the truth. David looked into her eyes, seeing the courage and determination that had made him fall in love with her. I promise, he said, but nothing's going to happen to you. We're going to succeed, and you're going to become the high priestess you were meant to be. The next morning would bring the most important day of their lives. Everything they had worked for, everything they had discovered, and everything they felt for each other would be put to the ultimate test. The fate of an entire planet hung in the balance, and it all depended on two people who had started as unwilling partners in a political marriage and had become something much more powerful together. The morning of the formal hearing arrived with unusual energy in the air. David could feel the tension throughout the palace as servants whispered among themselves and guards moved with extra alertness. Word had somehow spread that something important was about to happen, though most people didn't know exactly what. David dressed carefully in his formal diplomatic robes, knowing that today would determine not just his future, but the future of everyone on Zirathia. His hands were steady as he prepared his documents, but his heart was racing. Everything they had worked for came down to the next few hours. Princess Zaraketh was preparing for the trial of illumination in the ancient chamber beneath the palace. The ritual required her to fast for 24 hours and meditate in complete isolation. David hadn't seen her since their emotional conversation the night before, and he was worried about how she was handling the pressure. The planetary council chamber was packed with more people than David had ever seen there. Word of the hearing had spread throughout the government, and everyone wanted to know what the Earth diplomat had discovered that was so important. Minister Vexroth sat in his usual place near the Emperor, looking calm and confident. David wondered if the minister suspected what was coming. Members of the council, David began, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber. I have uncovered information that threatens the very foundation of Zarethian civilization. What I'm about to reveal will shock you, but I have proof of everything I'm going to say. He started with the financial records, showing how Minister Vexroth had been stealing funds meant for planetary defense. The evidence was overwhelming. Bank records, falsified reports, and communication logs that clearly showed the minister's involvement. The council members looked stunned as they reviewed the documents. But David was just getting started. He moved on to the evidence of sabotage, showing how the minister had deliberately weakened Zirathia's energy infrastructure. At the technical details were complex, but the conclusion was clear. Someone had been systematically damaging the planet's power systems from the inside. Minister Vexroth tried to interrupt several times, claiming that David was lying, or that the evidence was fabricated. But David had prepared for this. He had copies of everything verified by independent sources, and witness statements from palace staff who had seen the minister's suspicious activities. The real bombshell came when David revealed the historical records showing that other potential high priestesses had been eliminated over the centuries. The genetic markers that made someone eligible for the position were incredibly rare. But they weren't unique to Princess Zaraketh. The problem was that no one with those markers had survived long enough to claim their rightful role. Minister Vexroth has been preventing the rise of high priestesses for decades, David declared, his voice ringing with conviction. He knew that a true high priestess would be able to detect his sabotage and expose his crimes, so he made sure that no one with the necessary abilities would ever live to challenge his power. The chamber erupted in shocked murmurs. The Emperor looked pale, staring at his trusted advisor with growing horror. Minister Vexroth stood up abruptly, his face twisted with rage. "These are lies," he shouted. "This outsider is trying to destroy our government with false accusations. He's working with the rebellious princess to overthrow our traditions." But David wasn't finished. He pulled out the final piece of evidence, Minister Vexroth's secret plan to destroy the crystal chambers. The documents were in the minister's own handwriting, detailing how he intended to claim the chambers were becoming unstable and posed a threat to planetary safety. Without the crystal chambers, David explained, Zerathia would lose its primary energy source. Cities would go dark, technology would fail, and millions of people would suffer. And with the chambers gone, no future high priestess would ever be able to claim her power. The evidence was overwhelming. Minister Vexroth's co-conspirators, realizing that they were about to be exposed, began turning against him. One after another, they stood up and confessed their involvement, hoping to receive lighter sentences by cooperating with the investigation. As the hearing reached its climax, a deep rumbling sound echoed through the chamber. Everyone looked around in confusion until they realized the sound was coming from below, from the ancient crystal chambers, where Princess Zaraketh was undergoing the trial of illumination. The trial was the most terrifying experience of Princess Zaraketh's life. As she approached the central crystal formation, she could feel the massive energy building around her. The ancient crystals responded to her presence, glowing brighter and brighter as she drew closer. When she finally placed her hands on the main crystal, the energy hit her like a lightning bolt. Pain shot through her body as power beyond imagination flowed through her. For a moment, she thought she was going to die. The energy was too much for any normal person to handle. But she wasn't normal. As the power continued to flow, her body began to adapt and change. Her skin patterns shifted to colors that had never been seen before, deep purples and golds that seemed to glow with their own inner light. Her hair began to shimmer with the same energy that powered the crystals themselves. The transformation was visible throughout the palace. Energy patterns in the walls and floors began to pulse in rhythm with Princess Zaraketh's heartbeat. The crystal chambers themselves seemed to come alive, resonating with a power that had been dormant for over 1,000 years. Back in the council chamber, the Emperor watched in amazement as the energy displays around the palace confirmed what David had been saying. His youngest daughter was indeed the chosen high priestess, and the planet itself was welcoming her ascension. Minister Vexroth made one last desperate attempt to maintain his position. He pulled out a weapon and aimed it at David, screaming that he wouldn't let an outsider destroy everything he had built. But before he could fire, the energy surge from the crystal chambers overloaded his weapon, and palace guards quickly subdued him. The trial's success was announced by a brilliant flash of light that could be seen throughout the capital city. Princess Zaraketh emerged from the crystal chambers, transformed, her appearance now marking her permanently as the chosen high priestess. Her skin glowed with patterns that seemed to move and dance, and her eyes held a depth of wisdom that came from connecting with the planet's very essence. When she entered the council chamber, still glowing with residual energy from the trial, the entire assembly fell silent. Even those who had opposed her could see that she was no longer just a rebellious princess. She was something far more powerful and important. The Emperor, with tears in his eyes, formally recognized his daughter as the new high priestess. Minister Vexroth was immediately arrested and charged with treason, theft, and conspiracy. His co-conspirators were also taken into custody, ending decades of corruption and sabotage. But the victory came with a bittersweet realization. As high priestess, Princess Zaraketh would have responsibilities that would consume most of her time and energy. The The traditional role required complete dedication to serving the planet and its people. With little room for personal relationships, David understood this better than anyone. He had fallen in love with Princess Zaraketh, but he also knew that her destiny was bigger than any personal feelings. She was meant to lead her people into a new era of prosperity and technological advancement. However, their story wasn't over. David made a decision that surprised everyone, including himself. He requested permission to remain on Zerithia permanently, not as a husband or romantic partner, but as the official Earth liaison to the High Priestess. "I came here to build bridges between our worlds," he explained to the council. "I can't think of a better way to do that than by working with the High Priestess to advance both our civilizations." Princess Zaraketh, now radiant with her new powers, looked at David with gratitude and love. They both knew that their relationship would be different from what they had originally imagined, but it would be no less meaningful. They would be partners in the truest sense, working together to create positive change for both their worlds. Over the following months, David and the High Priestess implemented revolutionary changes to Zerithian society. The energy systems that Minister Vexroth had sabotaged were not just repaired, but improved beyond their original capabilities. New technologies were developed that benefited both Zerithia and Earth, creating a partnership that enriched both civilizations. Their personal relationship evolved into something that had never existed before in Zerithian history. They weren't married in the traditional sense, but they were bound together by something deeper than legal contracts or social conventions. They were partners in the most important work either of them had ever done. Years later, when David looked back on his journey from reluctant diplomat to partner of the High Priestess, he realized that the forced marriage had been the best thing that ever happened to him. It had led him to his true purpose and to the most meaningful relationship of his life.